Okay. Here we go. All right. Welcome everybody to the Novi Library Board public meeting. Tonight we're meeting together not as our typical board meeting, but for OMA training. And since we're all together, that's why we're recording it and we're making it public so everybody can see us and also learn with us. They have the opportunity. With that, I'd like to have a roll call from Trustee Bartlett. So Trustee Bartlett, if you can do that. And I think because we're on Zoom, we still have to state our county, city, and state. Okay. Go ahead, Trustee Bartlett.
Trustee Dooley.
Present, and I'm in Oakland County, Novi, Michigan.
Trustee Mitchner.
Hello, I am present. I am in Novi, Michigan, Oakland County.
Trustee Yu.
Present, Novi, Michigan, Oakland County.
Trustee Wood.
Present, Novi, Michigan, Oakland County.
Trustee Bartlett is present, Novi, Oakland County. Trustee Chair Curry.
Present, Novi, Oakland County, Michigan.
And as mentioned prior, President Crawford is absent.
Thank you very much. And we also have a special guest who I'll introduce shortly, which is Clare Membiela. So I'll get to you in a minute, Clare. We'd also like to do the Pledge of Allegiance right now. So if everybody can do that real quick. I pledge allegiance to the flag
of the
United States of America and to the republic
for which
it stands,
one
nation,
under God,
indivisible,
indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you. And at this time, we have approval and overview of the agenda. Is there a motion to approve the agenda as is?
Motion to approve the agenda as presented.
Is there a second?
Second.
All in favor? And we'll have to do a roll call vote because we're on Zoom. So Trustee Bartlett, go ahead.
Trustee Mitchner.
Yes.
Trustee Wood.
Yes.
Trustee Yu.
Yes.
Trustee Bartlett votes yes. Trustee Chair Curry.
Yes.
Trustee Crawford is absent. Trustee Dooley.
Yes.
Motion carried 6-0 and 1 abstention.
Thank you. All right, so at this time, I want to give a warm welcome to Clare Membiela. She is with the Library of Michigan. Clare helps public libraries navigate legal issues that impact library services, so we're really lucky that she's here today. Before joining the Library of Michigan in 2016, Clare was Associate Director for Library and Instructional Support for the WMU Cooley Law School Libraries, Head of Reference Services at the University of Miami Law Library, and librarian for the Miami offices of 2 national law firms. She has an MLS and a JD and 30 years of professional experience. So we welcome you today and you have the floor. Thank you so much for being here, Clare.
Thank you. And I'm in Ingham County, just in Hazlet, in case you need to know that. So welcome, thank you everybody for having me. Today we are going to talk about the OMA and some board meeting type things. I'm going to share my screen here. So now everybody should be able to see my screen. I am at home still. My office actually is going back to the building this week. Where the state decided that at least every department is doing something a little different, but the Department of Education, which is where the Library of Michigan falls, we are going back 1 day a week until August, and then we are going back 2 days a week. And so my colleagues have started going back today. So that's kind of exciting to go back in the building, but it is not yet open to the public. We don't know when it will be. So that's exciting. I'm going to tell you just a little bit about what I do. I am the library law consultant for the Library of Michigan. I work for the part of the Library of Michigan that is called Library Development. That department is the area of the Library of Michigan that acts as the state agency for libraries across the state. There are several of us that work there, and each of us kind of cover a different angle of libraries, so to speak, and mine is the law. So as you heard, I do have a law degree and a master's degree in library science. I'm a law librarian for most of my career, so I kind of consider myself the law librarian for libraries here in Michigan. And so my job essentially is to assist libraries, and that can be, I talk to boards, I talk to directors, I talk to members of the public, I talk to municipalities about legal issues relating to public libraries and other libraries and the services that they provide. As you're going to hear today over and over again, libraries are a little bit weird in terms of the law and in terms of how they're situated, not just in Michigan, but actually across the country. They're just kind of a weird animal. So that's where I'm coming from. As I said, I do work with boards a lot. I do a lot of training. I do have my email address and my phone number in several places here. So please don't hesitate to contact me if I can be of service. I'm more than happy to assist you. What's on the screen now is my disclaimer. Since I do deal with the law, I have to tell you that I can't be your attorney and I cannot provide you with legal advice. What I can do is provide you with legal information and enough, hopefully, context for you to be able to make some decisions, or at least go to your own attorney with some information to help make that process a little bit easier and maybe a little bit cheaper. So here's my contact information. Again, please don't hesitate to contact me. It does not cost you anything. It's your tax dollars at work. So I guess it's costing you something, but it's not a per hour charge like your attorney might charge you. Whenever I talk to boards, I like to say thank you for your service. You may not know this, or you may know this. My job has given me the opportunity to do a lot of research into Michigan and the history of libraries in Michigan. And so Michigan is one of the few states that has had libraries since before they became a state. Michigan is one of the first states in the nation to have libraries, like a library system throughout the whole state. And part of that has been library boards. Now, across the country, different states do their libraries a little differently. Some states, they're government entities like they are in Michigan. Some states, they're nonprofit corporations. Some states, they're organizations. So they're all a little bit different. But in Michigan, they have been, from the beginning, they've been government entities, and they've taken many different forms, but they've always been a government entity. So part of that government entity has always been the governance of that entity, and it's either been the municipality or it's been boards. So boards have been a part of libraries since the beginning. And they're so integrated into the different library types in Michigan that if there were no boards, there could be no public libraries. The public library structure would have to be completely different. So boards are made up of volunteers, which are you guys. And very few board members get money. Most of them, district boards are allowed to get some recompense, a very, very, very minor reimbursement, but very few boards, you're not earning money off this gig, right? You're not making a salary. You're doing it on top of your job, the job that pays your bills. And it's time away from your family. So all of those things, thank you very much. And I know from experience, and I know from the past 5 years at the Library of Michigan, that being a board member is not always fun. Whoever roped you into this probably told you it was going to be fun, but boards can be great and it can be miserable. It can go, and it can be that way in one day. So, being a board member is a lot of responsibility and it's a lot of work. And thank you on behalf of the Library of Michigan, on behalf of the State Agency for Libraries, and on behalf of the Department of Education. Thank you for your service. Thank you for supporting your community and helping your library, because without you, it couldn't happen. Okay, so when we talk about boards, and I know that some of you have been on the board for a while, some of you are old hands at the board, and some of you are new. We're going to just take a couple slides and talk about, what boards do. So boards govern, and depending on the establishment of your library, depending on what kind of library you are and the law that your library was created under, you can have an advisory board or a governing board. We're pretty much going to talk about governing boards. That is what you have in your library, is a governing board. So as a governing board, you govern by consensus. So you have to look at the board as kind of an entity, right? So it's an entity made up of many people, right? So you're made up of many people, but together you're one thing. So you have to move in unison. You don't move individually, everybody going their own which way and everybody doing their own thing. You have to move as a unit. Your authority, your powers come from the statute that your library was formed under. So powers for governing boards come directly from the legislature. And that's important because from a legal standpoint, that kind of sets the basis for how the library itself is an entity, right? Is an entity that can own money, is an entity that can own property, is an entity that can sue people or have contracts with people. And that's because it's an entity created by statute. It's not just something that a municipality said, oh, you know what, we're just going to have a club and we're going to call it a library. No, it's an official thing that was created by statute. These powers were bestowed on the board as a whole. If you read the establishment law that you're created under, you'd see that it says the board. It doesn't say the president of the board. It doesn't say the secretary of the board. It says the board. The board has these powers. So that means that, you can't separate the individuals from the whole. You all control the money, not one person, not three people. The board as a unit controls the money. The board as a unit has the responsibility and the accountability. So boards are often called directors, they're called trustees. And as trustees, if you're familiar, probably familiar with that term from other things like, estate planning and stuff like that. Trustees has the word trust built right into it, right? So as a trustee, your job as a board member is to steward the library, right? It's to safeguard and oversee the library. It's to run it, to essentially be the overarching boss and to make sure everything happens. But more fundamentally, it's to make sure that that library is preserved, is sustainable to carry on to the next board and the next board and the next board and the next generation of the community in Novi. So you're kind of just, people right now who are taking care of it for the community, right? You don't own the board, the library, you're just kind of watching it. You're monitoring it and safeguarding it for the community. Your largest job is to protect the assets of the library and to make sure that those assets continue and that the library is properly funded. None of you have a more important role than anybody else, right? From a practicality standpoint, there's usually a president because somebody has to be able to rein in, right, all the herding the cats. But nobody fundamentally is more important than anybody else on that board. No one member can act unilaterally and make a decision that's going to affect the procedures and the policies of the library. And if you all can't work together, then you will accomplish nothing. The board will accomplish nothing. If you can't work together and you can't get anything done, if you have to get everything done as a group and you can't work as a group, then it's going to be very hard to get something done. So I always say that, if you look at a Lego, I have at the top of the screen here, one Lego is interesting, but it doesn't really do a whole lot all by itself, right? But when you put that Lego together with other Legos and they all work together, they can create amazing things. And so to me, that's an analogy for a board. They're individual and Legos come in many shapes, sizes, colors. They're very, different. But when you put them together, they can create amazing things. And that's really what a board is. When you all come together, you can create amazing things. Now, we mentioned that libraries are different. And so, sometimes when people first get on boards, they think, well, this is the most board we all know is like a corporate board, right? So like shareholders and, a corporate board. But library boards, are different. There are some similarities, but they also function somewhat differently in a lot of ways. So the legislature is an example of a governing body, but that's also different than how boards work. Nonprofit boards, so some of you may be on nonprofit boards or may participate in some nonprofit entities. Those are different, they're not public. So those have some different things, but they also have some similarities. And then you have corporate boards, which have some similarities, but also have some fundamental differences. So there are some things you can analogize for a library board to things you already know about, but you have to be aware that there are some things that are significantly different. And so part of being a library board member is being able to kind of take a deep breath and understand that there may be some things that you expect to happen or some things that you think are the way something will work, but it's going to be a little different. And that's some of the things we're going to talk about today with the OMA. So how do you succeed as a library trustee? Well, I can tell you, and again, I've been intimately involved with boards for the last 5 years, a little over 5 years. It's about 5.5 years. And here's the things that I have learned. Training and learning. Be open to learning as many new things as you can about libraries, about the library industry, about how libraries work, about how your library works, about your municipality, about the municipality's relationship to the library, about just everything that you can, about funding, about how libraries get money, about public money and how it should and cannot be spent. All of these things, management, and public, management of public employees. So all of these things are things that are in your wheelhouse that are important to understand. You don't have to be an expert in all of them. One of the nice things is that there are plenty of people to help you. And so we're going to also mention that you have tons of help available to you. You don't have to feel like you have to get it all on your own, and you don't have to be an expert in it. Ask. You have to be willing to ask for help and ask for what you don't know. Don't be afraid to ask if someone talks about something you're like, what? I don't know what that is. Don't be afraid to ask or challenge, right? Because that's part of your job too. As a steward for your community and as a steward of the library and as a steward of public funds, part of your job is to challenge. If something doesn't seem right, if something doesn't smell right, if someone isn't, something looks like it's not quite the way it should be, ask, stand up. That's perfectly within your right. Read, watch, talk, participate. When you're in a board meeting, talk, discuss, ask questions. Don't wait for after the board meeting. The whole purpose of a board meeting is to talk. If you're waiting until after a board meeting to ask questions, then that's not what a board meeting is for, and that's not how a board member is supposed to operate. Trust and respect your neighbors. And I know, that seems like an obvious thing, but, depending on your situation, depending on your community, depending on how big your library is, depending on the establishment of your library and how big your board is, it can be very uncomfortable to be on a board because of some things that come up. Can be especially in the past year, there have been some very uncomfortable conversations that have had to happen. And one of the things that carries this group through, because remember, it's this group, is trust and respect. And like I'm sure you've heard a million times, you don't have to like somebody to work with them, right? So, you don't have to confuse trust and respect with mutual admiration, right? It doesn't matter what political affiliation you are. It doesn't matter what age or religion or anything everybody is. What matters is that your fundamental goal is the good of the library. You all have that in common. So even if you have nothing else in common, you have the fact that you all are here and you're taking valuable time out of your own personal life to help the library. So that's a major thing you have in common. And if that's all you have, that's okay. You can build on that as long as you have mutual respect and trust. And it takes time to build that. So if you have new board members, it's going to take a little bit of time to build that up because y'all are new, right? You're all just still getting to know each other, and that's okay. Again, as long as it's in an environment of collegiality, right, and civility. Focus on the welfare of the library. The important thing to remember about boards is that it's a partnership, right? So you have this entity that is a partnership with your director, right? So your director and your board are a very close partnership, like siblings, right? Even though the board oversees the director, and even though the board is quote unquote the boss of the director, if the director and board don't get along, that creates a miserable atmosphere. And believe me, you don't want to be there. That creates a miserable atmosphere for the staff, for the community. It's bad. So you need that partnership and that trust and respect also between the entity and the director, and between your municipality and the director and the board. So it's really all about conciliation, right? Being a board member is all about building relationships and conciliation and mutual respect and working together in all different forms. Okay, so when we come to board meetings, right? And today we're talking about board meetings and into the OMA. So virtually all of the work of a board occurs in a public meeting, in an open public meeting under the OMA. Most boards of Michigan libraries are autonomous, which means again, the statute that created you, and in your case, it's PA 164, which is the City Township Village or City Village Township Libraries Act, right? That's called PA 164. And there are two different kinds of city libraries that can be created under PA 164, but both of them have an autonomous board, right? Now, sometimes the municipality is not too happy with that, right? And your board is an appointed board. So you're actually a Section 1 PA 164. But even though the city appoints you, okay, the library is its own entity, right? Under the statute and the intent, there's several cases that show that the intent of the legislature in 1877, creating this statute, was to create autonomous libraries so that libraries were not beholden to the politics of their municipalities to the detriment of the functioning of the library. And that's very clear in several cases, in several opinions, that the boards are meant to be autonomous. That's why the legislature gave them complete control of the money. So, your municipality cannot decide how you spend your money. Your municipality cannot approve or disapprove your budget. The municipality cannot decide whether or not you get to, renew your millage. All of that is completely up to the board, right? So you have the PA 164 has some of the most broad board powers of any of the establishment acts in Michigan, except for district. Part of that powers means you have a fiduciary duty to the library as an entity. And fiduciary duty is a really serious duty under the law. And what a fiduciary duty is it says that you have a duty to always act in the best interests of the entity. So whether, in spending money, in obtaining funds, in making decisions, you are bound by taking that oath you took when you were appointed. You are bound to act in the entity's best interest. So not your interests, not your political interests, not your personal preferences, not your religious beliefs, not what your municipality wants you to do, even though they appointed you. You are not, that is not the purpose of a library board. A library board has a fiduciary duty to act in the best interest of the library, right? So your main focus is what is good for the library. And again, with pardon to Julie, that's not necessarily what's good for the director what's good for the staff. It's what's good for the library. Now, all of those things, the staff, the director, the community, the municipality, your personal, ethics, your personal, morals, your personal politics, all of that's going to inform your decision, and all of that's going to inform your point of view, and that's okay. But what you have to be careful of is imposing your direct point of view on the library as saying, okay, this is the way I think, so everybody in the community has to also feel this way because this is how I feel, right? Because there's other things at play here when you're talking about, you have your fiduciary duty, but you also have, as a library, you have the First Amendment right to information, which, that's a US constitutional right that everybody has for information. And the Supreme Court has linked that right to information to libraries, which means that people have a constitutional right to access information in libraries. And that means that they have a constitutional right to access the information they want to access in libraries. Right. So all of this together, right, all of these things that, you hear about controversies in libraries, all kind of, can end up on the board's desk, right? Whether someone likes a book on the shelf, whether someone thinks, a certain part of the community is not being treated fairly, whether there's a problem with a member of the staff, whether there's what the rules are in your library should be for different patrons, who gets to do a program, who gets to do a display. All of that eventually ends up on the desk of the board, right? Because you set policy. And if you can't put aside, your personal ambitions or your personal political agendas or other agendas, then you're not going to be able to adequately serve the entity that is the library. Okay, the Open Meetings Act. So whenever we talk about a statute, it's always good to think about the purpose of the statute. And the reason why I start off with this is when you read, say, legal opinions or attorney general opinions on Open Meetings Act, because that's how, your attorney and myself, when someone asks me a question, the first thing I do is I read the statute. And if it's not obvious, then I look to other sources like court opinions or attorney general opinions to see how how the jurists and how the state has determined these laws should be implemented, right? So part of the decision making that judges make when they're writing opinions and attorney generals is you think about, if you don't have something obvious in the law to say, well, this is what the statute says, because sometimes wording is ambiguous. One of the things you can do is you look at the legislative history, but you can also look at what is the stated purpose of the law, and is the situation that you're looking at within this purpose. So it's always handy to know what the purpose of the law is, because that can help you make some judgment calls if you yourself have some questions. So the Open Meetings Act, the purpose of the Open Meetings Act is transparency. It's the ability to permit citizens to access the meetings and the operations of their government, right? And so Open Meetings Act are in all 50 states. Different states call them different things, and it's at the federal government level. So this concept is not an unusual one, right? So this applies at the federal government level, it applies at all 50 states, and it applies here in Michigan. Now, they may be slightly different from state to state, but generally the purpose is the same: to permit citizens to address government, right? Which is part of the Constitution, right? To address government. So it's not only the ability for them to address government, but it's to encourage members of the public to address government. And if you think about it, and we look at just specifically public libraries, we're looking at, you are an entity that's fully funded by public money, right? You're funded by millage. Some libraries, you might be funded by some money from your city. you might be funded, you have some state aid, you have some penal fines. All of that is public money. And so the people that give you that money have, a right to see how their money is being spent from the inside out, and have a right to challenge you on how you're spending their money and how you're making decisions. And so that's pretty much the purpose of the Open Meetings Act, just to have everything out in the open. So it provides access to the proceedings of government, and it also imposed certain procedures that a government body must follow in order to encourage this participation. So what we're going to do is we're going to walk through some of the specific sections of the statute and talk about them. So one of the primary portions of the Open Meetings Act is the fact that decisions have to be made publicly. Now, you see the little citation at the top left-hand corner, the MCL, that's the Michigan compiled laws. And very briefly, for those who don't know, the Michigan compiled laws is the official statute set for the state of Michigan. And what that is so this is called the Open Meetings Act, right? So in, I believe it was 76 or around there, the act was passed, and then it gets amended, right? So we just had 2 amendments this year. So when an act comes out, either state or federal, works the same way federal. So when the act comes out in the state of Michigan and the governor signs it, the next thing that happens is that act is now taken to a legislative committee, and that committee pulls that act apart and applies the language to the appropriate parts of the codified statutes, which is the Michigan compiled laws. And so the statutes are divided by subject area to make them easier to find and to make them easier to update, so that anytime you look at the MCL, you're looking at the current law. If you didn't have that, you'd have to look at the 1976 Act, and then you'd have to look at each act after that to see what the amendments were and try to kind of put it all together yourself. So it can get very, very cumbersome. So having them in the statutory form under Michigan compiled laws is very, very convenient. The Michigan compiled laws is available for free at the legislature's site. And so this is chapter 15, section 2632. Okay, subsection 2 of 263. So it's pretty easy to find. And this will tell you that all decisions of a public body must be made at a meeting open to the public. So that seems pretty clear, right? So this is, when you read a little further, you'll see that this is not just decisions of a public body. So when you're talking about decisions, right, statutes are all about language, right? It's all about words. And one of the things that you might, think is, well, you think, okay, all decisions. Oh, I know what a decision is. Okay. But then you think about it and you think, well, what do they mean as by a decision, right? So if I have to, if Julie wants to, take a day off and she sends an email, do I have to have a public meeting to make a decision on whether or not Julie can have the day off? Like, what do they mean by decision? How far does this go? Well, whenever you're reading statutes, one of the first things that's useful to do is go to the definition area of the statutes. And usually that's at the beginning. Sometimes they put it in the middle, but usually it's at the beginning. And you look up to see what did the legislature mean by that word? Because sometimes they take some license. So you always want to double check that and don't assume that what you think the word is what they think the word is. So in the Open Meetings Act, decision means a determination, action, vote, or disposition upon a motion, proposal, recommendation, resolution, order, ordinance, bill, or measure on which a vote by members of the public body is required, and by which a public body effectuates or formulates public policy. So what do we learn from this? Okay. First, decision does not just mean the actual decision, but it also means the discussion leading up to decision, right? That's what it also means it's formulating public policy, effectuates or formulates public policy. So whenever you are doing something that affects the operations of the library and affects policy and procedure of the library, that's an open meeting question. So it's a large majority of what you do, but it's not necessarily everything. So when, you know, Julie wants to take a day off and she's going to her boss, which is you know, that is not something that you need to do in public meeting. Setting what Julie's benefits are and how many days off a year she gets is a decision for open meeting. So you see the difference? So, you know, you always err. One of the things that we'll go through later is whenever you're dealing with a law that has to deal with rights, whether it's civil rights or, you know, the ADA, or, and in this case, you know, open access rights, you find that the courts will tell you that you're going to err on the side of giving the right. Okay, you're going to err on the side of transparency. So if in doubt, right, if you're not sure, it's always better to do it in public than not. Because if you ever have a situation where it goes to court, the courts are going to err on the side of transparency because that's what the statute tells them to do. So the next part of the statute, this is subsection 3 now, says all deliberations of a public body constituting a quorum of its members must take place at a meeting open to the public. So you have to have decision in a public meeting, deliberation in a public meeting, but you also have to have, if you are a quorum, so if you are a group of board members and your numbers constitute a quorum,
Unfortunately, our children.
you have to meet in public meeting, right? So that's like today, right? So we're having just a kind of an educational session, but you're still meeting in public. So that, again, if you're not sure, there's a lot of libraries that, you know, have board retreats or have informational sessions and they won't have a public meeting. But most attorneys will tell you, you always want to err on the side of meeting in a public meeting, right? Because, you know, if a lot of times nobody comes to sessions like this, but if they do, fine. But it's always better to err on the side of a public meeting for lots of reasons. Remember, you want to build trust in your community. And what better way to build trust than to encourage your community to say, hey, we have nothing to hide, come on in, right? You have to be there anyway, so it's really not a big deal. A person, when you do have a member, you know, an open meeting, people are not required to give their name. And that's true even of a virtual meeting. So a member of the public cannot be asked to quote unquote register in order to attend a meeting, right? So you, all decisions that are, you know, dealing with the operations of the library, public policy, procedures, you know, anything affecting the operations of the library have to be done in an open public meeting. Anytime you meet as a quorum, you have to meet in a public meeting. And that's discussion, not just the vote. So that means there's no such things as working meetings, right? And you guys, I think, have that pretty well down. There are some libraries that do not. You have to be careful about things like parking lot chats, right? It's very normal for a board, you know, y'all talk to each other. After a while, you spend a lot of time together. So after a meeting, it's very common to walk out together to the parking lot, hang around someone's car, chat. Maybe it's just 4 of you, right? Maybe it's just barely a quorum. Maybe it's 5 of you. Parking lot chats, if you're a quorum, not okay. If you're discussing library business, if you're talking about, you know, the Spartans, or you're talking about you know, a sports team, that's fine. You can all, it's not that you're not allowed to talk to each other. If you're talking about, you could be talking about COVID, you could be talking about, you know, all kinds of things. As long as that doesn't reach to talking about library policy, whether it's future, past, present. Gee, I'd really like to do this in the library someday. Gee, wouldn't it be great if we did this? You want to stay away from all of that. And it's hard to do. I myself have been, with boards, and like a group of us will, like, maybe after a training or something, we'll have be having like coffee or something. And it's so easy to fall into that. And I've had to be, whoa, wait, we got to stop talking. So it's easy to do, but you have to kind of keep that on your mind. No individual canvassing to achieve round the horn votes. And this is a little, again, this is one of these things that's kind of very gray, right? Because it is permitted to, let's say that you have new board members, and let's say there's something complicated that is maybe the budget, right? That's coming up, and you all have a copy of the budget, and before the meeting, and you're all looking at it, and maybe one member's like, gosh, I don't really quite get this. What do you guys think about this? And they talk to different board members and they say, what do you think about this? Do you think this is okay? And do you think this is okay? So you talk. Now that kind of one-on-one where one board member is just trying to get more information, that is okay, right? It's okay to ask somebody, how do you feel about this? Where the problem comes in is when you start having factions of boards go behind the scenes and try to get consensus. So think about the legislature, right? So if you're familiar with how the legislature works, it's very common for caucuses and for different members of the legislature, when you have a bill, to go to different members of the legislature and try to drum up votes, right? To try to see, okay, let's make deals behind the scene. Let's figure out. You can't do that with the library board under the Open Meetings Act. So you can't come to a board meeting having already made a decision, right? If a group of you are coming to a board meeting already having talked to each other and decided you're all voting the same way, that's round the horn decision making. If you have one person feeling people out to try to figure out, well, I just don't quite understand this issue and I'm trying to figure out, that's different, right? So a lot of it is about intent, and a lot of it is about, the end result. Are we trying to get a block of votes, plan ahead so that we can come up against the other side that wants to vote a different way? So that's the problem. It's not talking to each other that's the problem. It's the intent and the end result that you're going for that is the issue. So what you want to remember is that the purpose of a board meeting is that discussion towards a resolution. That's what people come for. If you all come already knowing what the decision's going to be, then what's the point of having a meeting? You might as well just phone it in and say, yes, 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 done. There's no purpose to the board meeting at that point. When you're in a board meeting, you can't be texting each other saying, oh, did you hear what she said? Or what is, are you going to vote this way? Well, now I'm going to vote this way, and now we have to do this. No, you can't do that either. You have to be very careful about emailing each other, even behind the scenes, right? You can email each other, but when you start to have group discussions in email, that's when it can run afoul of the Open Meetings Act, right? A couple of you talking, passing information around. So when Julie sends you the board packet, that's fine. But then if you all start to discuss the board packet, that's when you can run into trouble. If you're texting, if groups are texting, that can run into problems. So again, you just want to kind of keep this at the top of your head. And also keep in mind that if you're using your personal phone to do board business, that is opening up your phone to FOIA. It's opening it up to, if there's ever some kind of legal action, it's opening up your phone to a subpoena. So if you're using your personal email for board stuff, that's not a good idea. So you should all have Novi library email addresses, and you should not be using text on your personal phone to discuss board business. More for your protection, because that can open up your personal texts if the occasion should arise to things like a FOIA request, or if there's a litigation request. And then there's kind of more sneaky things, right? So the law doesn't come out and say this, don't choose times or days for meetings when the majority of public can attend. But if you are a public body and you are in a community where a large majority of your citizens work, right? Work jobs, having your meetings at 2 o'clock in the afternoon on a Wednesday is probably not the most transparent thing you should be doing. And I'm not saying you guys are doing this. I know that you guys don't do this, but there are libraries that do this. You want to, kind of, again, it's inspiring trust in your community so that if you should ever have a problem or a controversy, your community is going to say, you know what? I trust them. I'm giving them the benefit of the doubt because they've always done the right thing by us, and we've always had access to everything. So why would they hide anything now? So, you want to build up that trust. So you want to do what you can to do that. And as I said, discussion is key, right? A board meeting without discourse is a board with problems, right? So if either y'all are coming to a meeting unprepared because you didn't read the packet, or there are board members sometimes who just sit there and then they open up after the board meeting and go after the board president or go after other board members for things that were said because they disagree. And that's not how you do it. If you're uncomfortable in open meeting saying your piece, then you might want to rethink being a board member, because being a board member means you're going to open up in public about questions you have about anything that's on the table, about problems you have with anything on the table. And there's ways to do it, right? Doesn't have to be contentious. And if you're interested, the Library of Michigan has some training sources on a system called Niche Academy and something called Web Junction. And they're free and they're available through our website. And I believe I have some links at the end. And they have all kinds of training things on things like difficult conversations, de-escalation, organizational health, all kinds of things that can help you with dealing with uncomfortable situations or tense situations, and how to kind of bring the temperature of a room down if it gets to that. And if you're a public body having an optional millage, you have a responsibility to engage in public decision making, right? To engage your public, to let them see how the sausage is made, so to speak. The law does give an opportunity for closed session, right? So there are 6 reasons you can have a closed session. Okay, there's actually a couple more in the statute, but the other 2 don't apply to you guys. So it's to consider the dismissal, suspension, or disciplining, or to hear complaints or charges brought against, or a periodic evaluation of a public officer. So that kind of encompasses hiring, firing, disciplining of a public officer. That all can be done in closed session if, and this is a capital IF, if the person that the complaint is lodged against, or the person whose evaluation it is, or the person who is being interviewed it is, requests it. So it's not the board's decision to put it in closed session. It is that person's decision to put it in closed session. So if you have a staff member that you are, there's a discipline issue and it's going to public meeting, then it is up to that employee to decide they want it to be in closed session. It is not up to the board. The board cannot decide that. And the employee can decide, no, I want it in the open. And the same with an evaluation. Evaluations of public employees is open record. That means that it is not secret. It's not confidential. And again, unless the public employee specifically requests it. If you're negotiating collective bargaining agreement, so if you have a union shop and you're negotiating your agreement, if you're going to be purchasing real property, so if you're going to be making an offer on a piece of land or a piece of property, you can make those decisions in a closed meeting, because obviously it wouldn't be very fair if the library had to kind of give its whole strategy for purchasing out in the open, and then someone could go and jack up the price, right? So that can be done in closed meeting. to consult with your attorney. So if you requested some, you asked your attorney for some advice, or you asked your attorney for a letter, opinion letter on something, that information can be considered in closed meeting because that's an attorney-client privilege situation. So, and then the application for employment. Now, one of the things for employment is that interviews have to be conducted in public. Again, unless there's a specific reason why the candidate wants it in private. But generally, the interviews have to be conducted in public. Now, sometimes you have a candidate who says, okay, you might get a stack of resumes and you're considering the resumes, and you may say, okay, this person has asked that we keep their resume confidential because they haven't told their current employer yet. Well, that could be construed as a request from the employee, from the potential employee, to keep it in closed session. So that could be discussed in closed session. But at the point the employee comes to the interview, now that would be public. So, it is possible to keep some of it in confidence, but again, some of this is a case-by-case thing, and some of it does get a little sticky. So I would advise you also to get information from your attorney as these things come up. But generally, the person who wants it to be confidential has to request it. From as far as the employee who is undergoing, some kind of disciplinary procedure or evaluation, or someone who is a prospective candidate who wants it to be confidential. Again, it's not the board who makes that decision. And then lastly, you can go into closed session if the information is already protected by federal statute. So if you have an employee with a medical condition and you have to discuss an ADA accommodation, that can be done in closed session. If you have a library privacy issue, maybe there's an issue with a patron who will not return certain items, and there's a reason why you have to go into the specifics of what the item is, that would be in closed session because that's protected by the Library Privacy Act. And maybe, maybe there's some, there's a whole lot of other laws out there, FERPA, if you're a school. So, if the information is already protected by another law, then that's another reason why you can go into closed session. But these are the only things that you go into closed session for. So closed session is really kind of should be more of a uncommon thing. And when you go into closed session, you have to enter the closed session from a public meeting, and then you have to come out of the closed session into a public meeting. And you also keep separate minutes for the closed session, but those minutes are confidential. They're not open to everybody. So we covered this. Meetings can't be limited in size. And this is something that we went through in the pandemic a lot. So when we had all of those, restrictions on the amount of people that could be together. Because the Open Meetings Act says that people cannot be prevented from going to a public meeting, right? They cannot be restricted from going to a public meeting. So that means that if you have a room, you have your room where you have your in-person public meetings, and it only fits 50 people. If person number 51 walks in, then you have to make a decision. Either you have to end the meeting, and then re-adjourn at another time when you have a bigger space. You have to move to a bigger space, in which case you have to make sure that someone puts a note somewhere saying that, hey, if you're coming to this meeting late, this is where we are. You can never turn someone away from a public meeting. You can't say, sorry, we're full, ever. That's, and which most of the time with libraries, that's not really an issue. Once in a while, if you have a library with a really big crisis or a big controversy, it can be, but that's rarely an issue right now, especially with the ability to do if you do a hybrid meeting, which is still kind of up in the air. We're going to talk about that in a minute. But that's a very important thing to know. Even if during the pandemic, when you were limited by law for the number of people that could be in the same room together, if one more person wanted to come, you had to shut the meeting down, or you had to find another way. There was, you could not turn someone away. So no one can be excluded from a meeting unless they're causing trouble. So if they're creating a public disturbance, they're screaming, they're yelling, they're drunk, whatever, then they can be excluded from a public meeting. But they cannot be excluded just because they were late and there's no more room, or because it's inconvenient, because they are, maybe they are disabled and they need an unusual accommodation. They cannot be excluded from that meeting. Public speaking, so public, the right of the public to talk. I know that you guys, I've attended a couple of your public meetings. I know that you've had quite a bit of public comment, so I think you guys are pretty well versed in this now. But so part of this whole idea of open meetings is the right to address the public body. So members of the public, as you know, have a right to address the public body. However, the body can make certain rules regarding how that can occur. You can't prevent people from speaking. You have to let everybody who wants to speak, speak. But you can limit the amount of time each person has to speak, as long as everybody has the same amount of time. You cannot limit the content of their speech. You cannot tell them what they cannot talk about. You can't limit their speech. It's even pretty rocky to tell them that they can't, you can't tell someone they can't curse. You can't tell someone that they can't, yell at you, or they can't, say mean things about you. That's a violation of their free speech. You can't do that. What I always tell libraries is, it's not what they say, it's behavior. So if you have somebody who comes to speak and is, belligerent, but is also threatening, is, stepping forward, is challenging you in a physical way, we all know what that looks like. That crosses a line, right? And that can cross into public disturbance. But if you have somebody who's just kind of yelling at you for the 3 minutes, telling you how bad you are or how awful you are to the community, unfortunately, that's one of the lovely benefits of being a trustee, and you have to kind of just sit through it. If someone is yelling racial slurs or inappropriate, like really offensive language, that's something else, right? That's something else. But again, there are words that you may think are offensive, but the law doesn't necessarily think are offensive. So, again, hopefully you don't get put into that position. But really what you want to do is focus on behavior and not what the person says. You can ask members of the public to sign in if they want to speak. That is okay. But what you're going to want to do ahead of time, and I am assuming that you have done this, because I know that you work with Ann Surank and she is awesome. I know that you should have a policy written on for your public comment period. And that would be the rules of the comment period, how much time everybody has, when that comment period occurs. You can have it at the beginning of the meeting, you can have it in the middle of the meeting, you can have it at the end of the meeting. You can have it more than one time if you want. You don't have to have it more than one time, as long as you have it one time. So, there are things you can do. It's better for you to make sure all that's written down and that the members of the public know it, right? So it's always better to notice your policies. Let them know, look, we want you to come speak, but these are the rules. And when we tell you your 3 minutes are up, your 3 minutes are up. And that, again, that's perfectly okay. So again, you should establish public comment timing and rules. You can have rules of conduct. Again, you can't regulate speech, but you can regulate their behavior. You can tell them this is not a debate session. You do not have to, in fact, most people would recommend do not speak back to them. You should model the behavior you want from them, right? You're always going to have people maybe who are troublemakers, but if the board treats each other with respect, again, we're coming back to this idea of, civility and respect, then that environment will carry through to your public, right? That will carry through to the public, that this idea of civil discourse, that it's okay to criticize, it's okay to challenge, but there are ways to do it as grown-ups and ways to do it and ways not to do it. You should also know that public comment doesn't mean people can speak in the middle of a meeting, right? So when the board is deliberating, the board should not be reaching outside of the board and being like, hey, you, what do you think? Or the peanut gallery, so to speak, should not be contributing to the discussion that the board is having during the meeting. The only time the members of the public should speak is during the comment period, right? I've been at board meetings where, somebody will just put in their 2 cents or contradict things that the board is saying. And it's like, no, you don't get to do that. The board has to do its job, and then you get to speak, or you get to speak when you're told this is when you get to speak. And so that's an important thing to know as well. Notice. Notice, and this is very well laid out in the statute. You have to have a list of all your meetings for the year 10 days after your first meeting of the calendar year. If the schedule changes, you have to put a notice of the amended schedule posted 3 days after that change was approved. If you have an unexpected or emergency change or special meeting, kind of like what happened tonight where we had to reschedule this, you have to post it 18 hours before the changed meeting. And you have to post that that 18-hour meeting on your website if you have a website. Okay, so obviously the library has a website, so you would have to post that 18-hour meeting on the website. And actually I have a link to it there on the bottom of that slide. There is a very recent opinion from the Court of Appeals from just last week where a municipality was ruled against because they had to reschedule a board meeting. They rescheduled it, they posted it on the door, right? But they did not put it on the website, and someone called them out for it, and they got caught and they got in trouble. So you want to make sure, and actually it was one of their own members that said, no, you can't do this. And they kind of fought, squabbled about it. And someone actually called the Township Association, was told by the Township Association, no, you can go ahead and have your meeting, it's okay. And the court said, no, it's not. You have to post it on the website. So it just kind of goes to show you that, this is enforced, right? So it's not something that, it's not like traffic tickets, you don't hear of OMA stuff all the time. And there's always this question of, well, is anyone really going to care if we follow the OMA? And like I said, it's only a problem when it's a problem. And when is it most likely to be a problem? When you have something going on, right? So when you have some kind of controversy or some kind of kerfluffle going on at the library, or some kind of disgruntled, member of the public, that is when people are going to start looking for things to pin you on. And so, the OMA can be so complicated and so kind of gray sometimes that it can be easy fodder for somebody to pin you on. And that's another reason why, if you're not sure, it's better to call your attorney and just, and Anne is actually an expert in OMA. So it's better to call your attorney and double check. It's money well spent. I always tell people that. Because it does happen. People do get called on it. Now, there are a couple situations, we talked about how if you're a quorum, you have to have your meetings, you have to meet in public meeting. There's a couple little exceptions to that, which are tucked away. You see, this is number 10, tucked away at the bottom of the statute. So if all of you are at a social event in the town, maybe the town has a big festival, and you all are like, hey, hi, that's okay. If you all bump into each other, at the same party, or a quorum of you bump into each other at the same party, do y'all have to hide from each other across the room? No. Again, just don't talk about the library. If you're all at a conference, if y'all go to MLA, like we have the Michigan Library Association conference, which I strongly recommend that you do. If you go to MLA and you're going to see a whole bunch of other trustees, and you're all in the same, room learning about stuff, that's okay too. That's okay. Can you ask a question about your library? Absolutely. But what you can't do is all glom together at the, in between sessions and make decisions about how you're going to change things in your library. So again, it's that working as a unit, it's making those decisions, it's having those discussions that are the dangerous part. It's not just being together and learning together. And there's a very good Attorney General opinion I've linked here that kind of goes through that and makes the explanation. So I highly recommend that you read it if you're interested in that. Committees. So if you're a board and you have committees in your library, and I believe that y'all have committees, your committee can meet not in a public meeting if it does not have a quorum of the board on it. So if you only have, 1 or 2 board members on your committee, and if the committee is not charged with making a decision, right? So if you're a committee where you are, and your charge is to give the board recommendations for fundraising. Maybe you have a personnel committee and it's the committee that collects the applications, and they look over the applications and maybe organize them for the board and give all the applications to the board with recommendations. That's fine. But if you are a personnel committee and you're making decisions on which applications make it to the next step and which applications get tossed, now you have to be in public meeting. So if the board charges the committee with a decision-making role, then that committee has to meet in public meeting. If the committee has a quorum, it has to meet in public meeting. A lot of lawyers will tell you this can be such a gray area that it's good for committees to err on the side of a public meeting. Again, you look at it like, okay, is anybody really going to come? Like, what? So those are decisions that you can make in talking with your attorney. But the key thing to remember is, does the committee have a quorum? Does it make decisions? And those are the things that you have to consider. If you're going to have a committee of the whole, odds are it's probably going to have to be in public meeting because you're probably going to end up with a quorum. Your minutes. So the law says that minutes shall be available. That means there's no question. Anytime you see shall or must in a statute, that's just, you have to do it. So minutes have to be available to the public. The first unapproved minutes have to be available within 8 business days. And then the approved minutes have to be available within 5 days. So then the question becomes, where do they have to be available? Well, remember, this law was written in 1976. So the original law says that the minutes have to be available at the library where people can get it. So for example, the circ desk, the reference desk. So they have to be available so the public can go up and say, may I have a copy of the minutes? I'd like to read them. But if you consider, we are now in 2021 and we are full internet and digital, and the past year has been all digital. You have to consider, again, is it a true following of the Open Meetings Act if you are only putting your minutes in paper at the circ desk or at the reference desk? And there would be some that would say no. Now, right now, there's nothing in the law that says you have to put them on the web page, but particularly for a library that's been putting them on the web page, because I've gotten this question from a few libraries, if you've been posting them to your web page for years, and then all of a sudden you decide you're going to put them at the circ desk, that's going to put a huge question in your community's minds. Why are they doing that? They've been on the website forever and now they're not on the website. What's going on there? Again, building that trust. Is there a really good reason to affect that trust? Is there a good reason to not do that? Like, why would you do that? Why do you want to do that? Again, the purpose of the law is to encourage public participation. And yeah, sometimes public participation is a pain in the patootie. It's right. I said it. It's being recorded. It is. I've been at those meetings. It can be very challenging. But again, you signed up for this, and we very much appreciate it. But that's part of being a public official. Part of being a public official is, you have to listen to the public, right? And you have to be open to the public. and whether, you know, you like it or not, that's part of your role. So I always strongly encourage libraries that, you know, to not take minutes off your website. And if you don't have them on your website, put them on your website. Because it is a very small thing to do, and it can generate a huge amount of trust in your community, which is good. It's good if you're going to be going for a millage. It's good if you're going to be asking your community for help. It's good if you run into trouble with your community. There's just really no downside to it. And in minutes, what's required in the minutes under the Open Meetings Act is very slim. If you read the law, it tells you that the minutes are actually, it just says showing the date, time, place, members present, members absent, any decisions made, and the purpose or purposes for which a closed session is held. The minutes shall include all roll call votes. The public body shall make any corrections in the minutes at the next meeting. So, you know, you're not obligated to pour your soul into the minutes. You know, I'm an advocate for put as much in there as you can, because I'm someone who tends to research in them years later when I'm doing something. But your attorney will probably tell you, you know what, you don't have to put anything more in there than the absolute minimum. And sometimes that's a good thing, right? Sometimes that's a good strategy. Again, depends on your individual situation. I always advocate for more transparency, but it's a balance. So, you know, it's really not a huge deal to put them on the website. It doesn't have to create a problem. It doesn't have to invite problems if that is one of the things that, you know, that I tell libraries, if that's one of the things that you're worried about. So again, this is just a recap: 8 days for the first set of meetings, minutes 5 days after that. And minutes are forever. So the FOIA, which is a whole other law, Freedom of Information Act, attached to FOIA are the document retention schedules, right, that the state keeps. And part of the state sets them. And part of the document retention programs are public libraries at the municipal level, right? And I'm sure Julie knows about this. There's a whole schedule of the documents that have to be kept. Board meeting minutes are kept in perpetuity. That means they are kept forever. You never throw away board meeting minutes. So, you know, again, that's another reason to just keep them on your website. You know, you don't have to really do anything with them. Just leave them up there. But they have to be kept forever. And that is also true of other board documentation. It gets kept forever. And then, you know, if you're interested, there's, you know, you can look, it's available on the state of Michigan's website. If you just Google records retention, public libraries, Michigan, it'll pop right up. I can also send you the link if you're interested, and it details for every kind of document you can think of, from employee personnel records to board meeting minutes and your budget, what you have to keep in for how long. But board minutes are forever. So what's not protected? So if we look at these minutes and we look at, we look at records, these records that we retained, records that are not protected under the Freedom of Information Act. So records that are completely open, and I'm just kind of giving you this as an aside to the Open Meetings Act, because I find that a lot of board members aren't aware of this. Staff salaries and employment contracts are open public record. Staff benefits are public record, but not including any staff personal information or medical information. Employee evaluations are open record. Any discussion of your strategic plans or any kind of board, you know, public discussion is open record. Any contract for purchases that you've made is open record. So anybody has the right to see any employment contract, any contract that the board has signed, any contract Julie has signed. Any contract is completely open record that people can request through FOIA. And any kind of financial information for the library is completely open record. It's completely open book that anybody can FOIA. Does that mean you have to leave everything out on a table for people to pick up? No. But it means that, you know, for example, if you're having a board meeting and you have documents like a copy of something that's being handed to the board members, you might as well put some available for any member of the public that's there, because it's all public. And again, that can generate and build that trust with your community. So in 2020, we had 2 amendments to the OMA, and I'm not going to go into a lot of detail on this. I just want to make sure you're aware of them. These all have to do with virtual meetings that you all have been very proficient at lately. The only thing I really want to mention about this is that a remote meeting is available to boards until December 31st, 2021, as long as your municipality has a state of emergency. Or if the state has one, which we do not right now, but if your local municipality has a state of emergency, or individual members of the board can participate remotely if there is a state of emergency where they live, if they have a medical condition, and the statute defines medical condition as any kind of injury or illness, or there's not a whole lot of restrictions there. Or if if they have military duty. Those are the only 3 reasons that you can participate remotely. What it used to be that before the pandemic and before these changes, the law was unsettled in the Michigan OMA as to whether or not board members could attend meetings remotely. And so there was this loophole that enabled board members to attend meetings via Skype, via Facebook, via Zoom, or by telephone. Well, and a lot of board members will say if they're at their cottage in the summer, they'd attend board meetings remotely, or if they go to Florida in the winter, they would attend board meetings remotely, and that's gone. That is totally gone. You can't do that anymore. You can only the 3 reasons: state of emergency, health, or military duty. And after December 31st, 2021, it is only military duty. Or of course, if there's an ADA accommodation needed, that would be another reason why you'd be able to attend remotely. So that's something else just to have on your radar there. You do not have to have an agenda under the OMA. There's no requirement to have an agenda. If you do have an agenda, it's nice to make it available to members of the public. The only time that's required is under the rules for the remote meetings. They require that you put the agenda on your website, but for in-person meetings, it is not required. You want to remember that there is a requirement to have ADA accommodations. So you want to make sure that your members of the public know that if they need an accommodation, they can get it. Okay, so tips for compliance with the OMA. Training, lots of training. And make sure that your bylaws, it can be very helpful for your bylaws to have a requirement there that requires new members to be trained and to undergo some kind of orientation or training. Have some cheat sheets. It's okay to have a cheat sheet for the OMA that says like, okay, closed session, when can we have them? How do we do it? You can post signage around the room that just say, remember the OMA. If you're unsure, you think maybe there might be, maybe if someone in your group has some question. You can assign your one board officer, like the secretary, to be your OMA guru, someone who this is one of their responsibilities, to keep track of the OMA and become the expert in the OMA. Like in some boards, they make someone the parliamentarian. You can make someone the OMA expert. Post your notices and your minutes on the website if you feel comfortable with that and if you're able to do it. And as I said, make discussed documents available at the meeting for members of your public. So again, some of those are steps that the law doesn't absolutely require, but again, it's all part of encouraging the members of the public to earn this trust and to kind of build this trust. If you're not sure, as we said, the OMA and FOIA are both intended to provide transparency and citizen participation. The law will always tell you to err on the side of transparency. Also, rely on your attorney. Ask them if you have a question and you're just not sure. If you want to report an infraction to the OMA, and again, there are some duties that if you are knowledgeable about someone else in your organization who is doing something that is illegal, as a public officer, you have a duty to do what you can to mitigate that. And so you can report it to your library's attorney. You can report it to a local prosecutor. You can report it to your municipal attorney. And those are some ways that you usually like the person who would bring charges would be the local prosecutor, but sometimes it's more comfortable maybe to talk to your attorney first. If you're found in violation of the Open Meetings Act, the violations at worst can cause decisions to be invalidated, including your budget, depending on when the violation occurred. Intentional violations are punishable by criminal fines of $1,000 per official. And that's out of your pocket. Civil fines can also be levied of $500 per official. And if you get caught more than once in your same term, it goes to $2,000 per official. So it can be kind of costly if you get caught and if it gets prosecuted. Okay, so we talked a little bit about civil discourse. This is pretty much our last slide, 2 more slides. So I just want to mention that, you are a new board. You have a lot of, new members. I know that there is some, I don't know, controversy, but there's been some discomfort in your community with some things. And so, it just helps to know that, decision making can be messy, and that's okay, right? You're not always going to agree, and that's okay too. Usually problems, as I said before, are caused by behavior, not because of different points of view. Remember that you all set the tone and culture for your workplace, not just your board meetings, but your workplace. If you're a dysfunctional board and you're snipping at each other, it's going to affect the whole library. It's going to affect Julie, it's going to affect her staff, and it's going to permeate through the whole environment of the library, and everybody's going to feel it until it gets down to members of the public. Trust me, I can guarantee this. I've seen it happen a lot. If you need it, behave as if your parents and your children were in attendance, right? Treat your colleagues as you want to be treated. I know that sounds cliched, but it's true, right? I know it's hard, especially now when everybody has so many, I don't know about you guys, but everybody has so many different points of view in our communities, and usually a board's a cross section of a community. So it only stands the reason that there's probably varying, opinions on politics and all kinds of things on the board. So it can be extremely difficult, right? It's very hard. There's some very challenging things going on right now, but it's not going to do anybody any good, and it's not going to help your community if everybody just, lashes out, or if people don't treat each other with that professional respect. One of the things, so I've done partly through my legal training and partly through other training, I've done training in mediation and training in facilitation and all that kind of stuff. And one of the things that I have found that works is if you are a board or a group that is experiencing some tension, one of the things that can really help is to set specific rules for your meeting at the set, and actually write them down. And I've had boards write them in different colors on the wall. You can write them, but, for example, have rules like, cell phones off or on mute, whether it's a small committee meeting or whether it's a board meeting. Every board member who wants to speak gets a chance to speak, and nobody gets to speak twice until everybody has had the chance to speak once. Only one person speaks at a time. Nobody can raise their voice. Everybody will actively listen to their colleagues. And again, active listening, there is a 3-minute video on YouTube that is excellent, that tells you how to actively listen. Now, I'm 58 years old, and this was something I didn't know. So, it is worth, I know, you may poo-poo me, but it's definitely can be very helpful. All members abide by the same debate rules, whatever your parliamentary procedure. If you use Robert's rules, everybody abides by the same rules, so that, when somebody decides that the debate's over, it's over. If you wouldn't post a statement on a billboard by the highway or on a giant sign in front of the library, don't say it to your colleague, right? Don't say it in private. Don't say it quietly. Certainly don't say it in a meeting in front of staff. Don't say it in a board meeting, right? That's just kind of common sense. You can disagree. Disagreement is fine. it's good, it's healthy to debate and disagree, and you can be emphatic, but bullying, intimidation, and name calling are not okay. And again, this is stuff that I'm sure y'all know, and this is pretty common, but you know, it doesn't hurt to have a reminder. And it doesn't hurt to have some rules that everybody has in front of them during the meeting. And the last rule is, and you know, sometimes I find with boards, not with you guys haven't given me any reason for this, but if worse comes to worse, you know, sometimes you just have to say, get over it. You know, we're all grown-ups, and you've accepted this public office, and everybody's a grown-up, right? Not everybody has to like each other. There's going to be differences, but if you can work together, you can do a lot of really good things, right? You just persevere. You can do a lot of good things, but you have to be able to see that big picture. And that's what the board is all about, the big picture. Julie is about the small day-to-day picture. You are about the big picture, right? So you have to be able to set some things aside to get the job done, right? So how do you do this? Open yourself up to non-board gatherings, right? If again, festivals in town, if the library has a big fundraiser, volunteer, work together in another capacity than the board so that you get to know each other in a different context. Work together on a project. It doesn't have to be a committee. It could be one project, it could be marketing. It could be who knows, something that Julie is working on. It could be a summer reading thing, whatever. Something that, Julie needs help on, work together. Work on something you're not used to working on with someone you wouldn't normally work with. One act of kindness, patience, and understanding can go a long way. So, be the guy that brings donuts to the meeting once in a while, if you know what I mean. And you know what? If you have a member among you who consistently is causing discord or is consistently for lack of a better word, Debbie Downer in the group who is causing trouble, don't be afraid to step up and address it as a group. Again, with boards, I say over and over again, if you're a 7-member board or a 6-member board, or a 5-member board, and you have one person who is causing trouble, that means there's 4 more of you who want to make it right. So the 4 members have the ability to, come to the 1 member and say, look, this is not cool, and this is how you have to behave as a board member. And that is when your bylaws come very handy, because it's difficult to get rid of a board member, right? You can't just kick them out, and even the mayor can't just kick them out. But there are ways to deal with a board member who is causing trouble, but you're going to want to put that in your bylaws. They could lose committee assignments. They could lose their office if they're a board officer. So there are ways to deal with it, but you have to plan ahead and put it in your meetings as a way to address these issues should they arise. It's one of those things that you hope you never have to use, but you're glad you have it if you need it. Okay, here are some resources I have. So you guys will have those. I will give Julie a copy of the slides. I think maybe you may already have a copy of the slides. I moved them around a little bit, but they're all still there. I will send her this copy just so she has the newest copy. And there's all sorts of things on here to assist you. And I appreciate your patience and your attention. I know this is kind of a long presentation, and thank you very much. I would be happy to address any questions if anybody has any.
Thank you so much, Claire. We appreciate it.
I'm going to stop my share.
Thank you. So Trustee Shirakuri at one point had his hand raised, but we didn't set the rules on it. I forgot to set those rules.
I did too. I'm sorry.
It's okay. I'm sorry too. But now it's open for Q&A, and Trustee Shirakuri had his hand up. So Trustee Shirakuri, you have the floor.
Hi, Claire. Thanks for the presentation, by the way. Actually, 2 different questions that popped up at different times.
Okay.
So one question is, we made our emails as a group available to the public. Mm-hmm. We'll sometimes get emails from members of the public going into some detail on some issue or other, mm-hmm. and occasionally asking about a specific trustee's thoughts, or I wonder why Trustee Shirakuri thinks this, or whoever it is. Mm-hmm. Do you reply all? Do you not reply? What's acceptable or not acceptable? Because it's got all of us on there, right? If I reply to all saying this is my thoughts, is that an OMA violation?
No, it's not. You can share information. What you want to be careful of is getting into a whole discussion that could lead to a decision. So if it's just what is this particular board member's position and why is he taking this position, then that would be perfectly reasonable for, say, you to reply to that member of the public and CC your colleagues. But then, then if that then continues where now outside of the member of the public, now you're all emailing each other, that's when you have to be careful.
Now, is it recommended if it's a question directed just to me to respond, CC everybody, or just to have an engage with the member of the public directly, like I would have done?
I would say that's up to you. Again, you just want to be careful of the continuing conversation after that.
Okay. The next one, the other question that came up was, okay, so we have these committee meetings, they're non-quorums, but we're supposed to make a recommendation.
Mhm.
At what point do we, so we're choosing a asphalt contractor in the finance committee, say, right? And there's 3 guys, but all 3 of us recommend this thing. In a sense, we've made a decision coming into the meeting. Are we violating that round robin, what was that, not round robin?
The round the horn decision making?
Correct.
No, I mean, in committee, this gets a little stickier because if the board is giving the committee the charge that they want recommendations on who would be the best contractor for this project, then what your job as the committee is to say, okay, we've reviewed these and we think this is the best contractor for this reason, but you're going to give the board all the information. So they have all of the contractors who were in that process, because the decision isn't made until the board votes on it. So if you came out of your finance committee and then you went to, 4 board members and said, this is the guy we want to use, and I really strongly recommend you go with this guy. And then they say, oh yeah, we're all going to go with this guy. Okay, we don't care what those people said. That would be a problem. But if you, as your committee, is presenting that as a package to the board saying, here's the 3 guys, this is the one we like, this is why, then that's exactly what you're supposed to do. Because you haven't made the decision, you're just giving them a recommendation.
Okay, thank you.
Sure.
Do any other trustees have any other questions?
I do.
Okay, Trustee Mishner, you have the
Hey,
floor.
Tara.
Hey, so I had a few things. First of all, thank you so much, Claire. It was really good. There's always something we can learn. I wanted to get some clarification on a few things.
Sure.
Let's see. So for example, like we got a notice or of invitation actually to meet, to tour the iCube as a board, all 7 of us. So we will all be there. We'll definitely have a quorum and we'll be in the library. Excuse me. I got a diffuser right here and it's killing me a little bit. So I apologize. But my thought is that's a public meeting because we're all together. So should that be posted?
What are you going to be touring?
We were given an invitation to tour a room in our library that hosts like craft materials and things like that. So it's like just a little invitation.
So one of the things that the Open Meeting does, Open Meetings Act does is that, and I'm sorry, I didn't really spend a whole lot of time on this one. It figures the one thing I didn't really mention is the one thing.
No, that's good.
There is an option that if, for example, if the board is invited or the board is asked by someone like the Rotary, or to have like they want to make a presentation to you, or maybe, a senator or someone comes and wants to have a presentation with you. You can do that and not have a public meeting as long as you're not discussing library policy. So if the purpose of this meeting is to go tour this room and you're just going to tour the room and say, oh, this is lovely and I love this room, and they're going to present as to why they did the room and how they did it, that's fine. As long as you're not going to discuss well, this is what we would like to do with this room, and this is how much money we're going to give you to spend on this room. And this, as long as you don't get into, the decision making and policy and procedure, like board business, you're okay to tour that room.
Okay, and this is just in the library, so it's not Rotary
Yeah,
or any outside group.
Yeah,
Okay.
yeah.
Okay,
No, that's
helpful.
okay. That's okay. But you just want to be careful. You don't want it to turn into a board meeting.
That's my fear. So it's just
Yeah.
light. I think it's not required
Right.
to attend or anything
Right.
like that. My
Right.
thought was just making
Right.
sure. So that was
Right.
one.
And again, you want, somebody in that group's going to have to be willing to stand up and say, we can't talk about this. And that's something that your board president, should be fully able and willing to do.
Yes. I had a couple more, if you don't
Sure.
mind if I finish. And then you can go if that's okay. Okay, thanks. So that one was one. And then the other one is, so you had mentioned documentation that the public is entitled to when it comes to what's available as far as like open record and things of that nature, as far as salaries, benefits, etc. Would org charts be a part of that? Because I've asked for org
Yes.
chart for a while and I've never got one.
Yes.
So I
org
just
charts.
wanted to.
And let me be clear, the board, so that's public record. So those are the
Yes.
documents that any member of the public, I could FOIA an organizational chart. The board, you are the boss of the library. You have access to anything you want to see.
Yeah.
Okay, whether, now there's this idea of what you have and what you can do it, should you do it. So does that mean you should go into the back of the library and go through everybody's personnel file? No, but if you have a reason why you need to see a personnel file, you have full access to that. As the board, you have access to anything you want to see in the library. You're legally responsible for the library.
Thank you.
Right? So if anybody's going to sue the library, they sue the board. Okay, that lawsuit comes to you.
Yeah.
So part of that is you have access to anything you need to do your job. So you should definitely have access to an organizational chart.
So what happens when you've asked for like several years and you don't get it?
I would FOIA it. I would make it official and FOIA it.
Okay.
That's what I tell boards to do.
Okay. Thank you, Claire.
You're welcome.
Are you all set, Trustee Mishner? Okay. Trustee Shira Curry, go ahead.
Yeah, just following up on what Trustee Mitchner mentioned about like the iCube thing.
Sure.
Like one thing that might be on a horizon, hopefully, is let's say we're as a board trying to schmooze a big donor to help set up our foundation.
Mhm.
Are we allowed to go out to some sort of a social gathering with this individual? Tell them what a great library we are, et cetera?
As long as the conversation is strictly talking about the donation and not about library business.
Okay.
You know what I mean? So as long as you're not talking about, procedures and policies or problems in the library, you're just talking about the donation, and they present to you, this is what we'd like this donation to be used for, or you tell them, we have this, lovely room, we have, that we'd like you to sponsor. So as long as the confines of the conversation stick to, things like that, and not to, not to library business and policy, you should be okay. You may want to double check with Anne, with your attorney, as far as whether or not like all of you should go, or whether, that may be something that you have a committee.
Okay.
Because then you're like, might be a really good thing for the finance committee, because then that takes that out of the problem.
Okay.
Because one other thing you have to be careful of is you cannot spend public money on whining and dining. So you would not be able to say, take this person out to eat on library money, or buy your own meal with library money. That's a violation of public funds.
Right.
So that's, that's something else to think about.
Okay. One other question you mentioned like on HR issues, closed sessions only appropriate if the individual being discussed requests it.
Right.
Unless
it's already dealing with an area that's covered by law, like an ADA issue would be already, because of the medical issues, it would already be covered by a closed session.
So just as a hypothetical, let's say Director Farkas it's come to her attention that there's a legal or some other issue with one of our employees.
Mhm.
And she wants to bring that to the board attention.
Mhm.
She basically has to make it public at that moment then?
Yeah, unless the employee is requests that it not be made public. But depending on the nature of what the infraction is, then like, let's say that you have an employee that potentially stole money, right? So what I would do in that situation is I would say, okay, here's all the evidence I have that this employee stole money. I would probably call my attorney and say, okay, we have this, that we believe we have this employee who has stolen money. You know, what do you feel is the best way to handle it? And then it could be closed session because you have an attorney, you know, opinion. Or you can get the attorney on the phone during the meeting. And again, that can be in closed session.
Okay.
Because chances are it's not going to be, the way that these things tend to happen is usually it might be the director calls the president of the board first and says, look, I think we have a problem here. And then usually it's then brought to the employees, you know, attention. So once the employee is brought into it, the employee has the right to say, I want it done in you know, I want it done. I want this to be in closed meeting.
Are you all set, Trustee Shirkuri? Okay.
Yes, thank you.
Okay, sure. Anyone else? Any other trustees? Are you good? Okay. I do have, oh, Trustee Mishner, yes, go ahead.
Sorry, thank you. I just have one other question that I thought about, and that's just in regards to, you had mentioned like trying to be as transparent as possible, doing as much as possible in open and public, just to be above board is my thought, like have a board above board, yes? So lately we have had discussions about like, do mostly all of your stuff in committee and come ready to vote. Like I know recommendations are great, but it seems like the direction has changed a little bit to like get everything like formed in committee and then come. And I just wanted to kind of like reiterate, like, I think you're basically coming up with things together that you agree on and then presenting them, right? And then the rest of the board gets to hear what's shared and make their own decisions. And you want that mostly to be in public, right?
Absolutely.
As opposed to like on a phone call or
absolutely, absolutely right. If you're making decisions about things like contractors or how to spend, like whether or not to spend, you know, money on certain projects, you should not be coming to a meeting with all of you already knowing how it's going to turn out.
Okay.
Frankly, there should be an element there of discussion at the meeting because that's the purpose of those meetings.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
I have a question if everybody's all set. It's in regards to FOIA. So when you go through the process of FOIA, because I used to work for a different government entity, so we came on this sometimes. If the document requested exists, the public has the right to that said document.
Right.
If the requester is asking for something specific though that hasn't been made yet,
right,
what happens there?
So if you're, well, let's take the example of the organizational chart just because it came up. If Tara or somebody puts in a FOIA request for an organizational chart, but let's say Novi doesn't have an organizational chart in the traditional way that we all think of an organizational chart. Well, that's okay. And in which case, there's no requirement in the act for you to create an organizational chart for that FOIA. All you can do is send a response back saying, we do not have an organizational chart.
So if there's like a document that's already created, you can FOIA that.
Right.
But if you are requesting any modifications to that document and it doesn't already exist, then that would be a discrepancy. Is that correct?
Right. If you're, the way the standard goes is that if what you're requesting, like for example, it could be, let's say that you keep statistics or reports and somebody says, look, I'm FOIAing this specific, like one of the things we get a lot, you hear libraries get a lot, is these like organizations that are trying to build up public databases. Okay, so they'll say, we want a list of all your employees. We want a list of what they make. We want a list of what their experience is. All of that is public record. But the library does not have any requirement to create that report for that person. Okay, they can say, here's a whole lump of data and you can pull it out yourself.
Okay.
But they are under no requirement to create a document that somebody wants.
Okay. And then I have one more question, because we have public comment coming up pretty soon.
Okay.
In our public comment, we've been asking our speakers to state their first, last name and address.
Oh, sure.
Attorney advice during one of our public meetings corrected us and made sure that they didn't have to give their full mailing address.
Right. I probably wouldn't do that. Right.
Right. So that was something that we corrected, which was great. But the first, the last name and address, is that considered a registration or is it not considered a registration?
Well, in order to attend a meeting, you can't ask people for their name and their address or any information. People are allowed to go to a public meeting incognito. But for public speaking, if a member of the public wants to speak, the entity can impose rules and ask the person to put down their name. It can ask to put down, say, like what you guys say, do you live, what city you live in, what county you live in. It's probably, I would caution strongly against having people give you their address, because there's other laws in Michigan that are very strict about protecting personal information. So I would caution very strongly against that. Really look at, why do you want that information, and what is the purpose of getting that information, and then just get the least amount that you need.
Thank you. I appreciate that clarity.
Sure.
Because we're about to do that in a couple of minutes. Do any of the trustees have any other questions? This was awesome. Thank you so much.
Oh, you're
we
welcome.
Really appreciate it.
Anytime. Sure. Anytime. Thank you. Thank you for having me.
Thank you. Okay, we're going to move forward in the meeting to public comment. In order to hear all citizen comments at a reasonable hour, the library board requests that speakers respect the 3-minute time limit. This is not a question answer session. However, it's an opportunity to voice your thoughts with the library board. We're requesting, because it's still something that we have to address, that you state your first and last name. But when it comes to your address, you don't have to give your full address. We just want to let you guys know that. And Dana, are you there? Because we're going to need your help. And also we need someone to time.
Yes, I'm here. I can time as well.
Timer? Okay, thank you.
Yeah. Do you want me to hold it up?
Yeah, I think it's
okay?
best to hold it up for the speaker.
Okay. Is it showing it the right way? Probably not.
Yeah.
Yep. Okay.
Thank you.
Oh, do we have any public comment?
Yeah, that's what I was going to ask, is if we have any public comment or anyone that wishes to address the board tonight. Okay. I don't see any hands raised. All right. Thank you. All right, thank you for everybody that attended, including the public, if you're there watching right now, or if you're in the meeting with us. At this moment, I'd like to entertain a motion to adjourn. We're at the end.
I so move.
All right, do we have a second?
Second.
All right, actually, Trustee Bartlett, I always say all in favor. I'm used to saying that, but Trustee Bartlett, can you please do a roll call vote?
Trustee Wood,
Yes.
Trustee Yu,
Yes.
Trustee Bartlett votes yes. Trustee Chair Curry,
Yes.
Trustee Crawford is absent. Trustee Dooley,
Yes.
Trustee Mitchner.
Yes.
Motion carries 6-0.
Okay, thanks for attending, everybody. Thank you for taking this time out with us.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Have a good night.
You
Bye.
too.
Have a good
Thank
night,
you.
everyone.
Have a good night.
Thanks,
Bye.
Claire.
Thank you.
Claire, we appreciate it. Thank you.